I know you're the Senior Director of Clinical Data Management for Syneos, but some of our audience may not know you as well as I do. So could I invite you to perhaps say a few words about yourself and your background, and let the audience know who you are?
So yeah, Trevor Griffiths, I'm a Senior Director of Clinical Data Management at Syneos Health. I've been with Syneos Health just under 24 years at the moment. The vast majority of my time has been based in clinical data management, working in clinical data management, and in particular the last 10, 12 years, really in partnerships, whether it be with pharma companies where we have FSP solutions or partnership solutions, but also more recently being involved quite heavily with the partnership that we have with Viva as well.
I have to describe the fact that I've been in DM for more than 20 years now. I'm at that point where I don't want to give an exact number. But one of the things we've talked about over the last couple of years, the change in the industry. So perhaps I can ask you to just reflect on how you've seen the industry change, particularly perhaps the CRO industry with respect to DMO for the last X number of years.
Yeah. Well, I'm like you. I have 20 plus years in data management, so I remember a time when pretty much all data came in on paper CRFs. So I remember not long I was in the industry. EDC was the next big thing. Obviously, EDC is very standard now, but the way we've seen it changed in CRO world, and particularly the last couple of years, there's two what I would say big changes we're seeing. One, we're seeing more different types of data. It's not the traditional data capture via EDC anymore. Yes, that's still happening, but we're getting more sources of data. If you went back even just 5-6 years ago, typically you would have EDC data coming in, and then your other data would be IVRS, central labs, and maybe some ECGs and things like that. But now it's not normal to have 10 or even 12 different types of data coming in from a different source on a study, and that's something that we're seeing regularly at Syneos Health now. So ultimately, what that means is you need a good DCT strategy around that as well. The other thing that we're seeing more and more, and I think COVID is one of the things that maybe pushed this even a bit further, is the need to move quicker and how you can do that using AI and machine learning. We've seen AI, machine learning used to clean data, particularly on the manual review of data. And we've actually seen in some larger trials where we've managed to reduce the manual cleaning effort by over 3,000 hours on a single trial by the use of machine learning.
That's incredible. I mean, if I think about then that initiative to reduce those hours, would you say this is a bad time to be a data manager or a really good time to be a data manager?
I think it's actually a really good and exciting time to be a data manager. Now, change is constant, and change is for the good more often than not. And I think this is really exciting for data managers. What we're seeing more and more is data managers are becoming more pivotal to the running of the clinical trial, particularly with all these different sources of the data. It's incumbent on the data manager to be how are we going to get this in? What format are we going to get it in? How are we going to get it clean so that we can actually progress through? So if anything, we're finding that data managers are getting involved even earlier and becoming even more of a pivotal team member of the study team. So I think it's actually quite an exciting time to be a data manager.
Good, I'm glad. I thought I'd just check. I mean, I think if I build off what you said, I mean, for me, getting rid of the really dull tasks, the repetitive stuff, that's got to be good. But I think I would ask our audience to think that's not about reducing the number of data managers we need. It's about freeing people up to do the clever stuff. And I think when you think about reviewing the whole patient, looking at those data sources, working out a strategy to bring it all together, that's where I want data managers to be employed, not looking at line listings with highlighter pens and praying to God they can finish it this week. I'm still scarred from my early DM experiences with listings that were 2 reams full of paper, a highlighter pen and some post-it notes, and off you go. That can't still be what we're doing today. We've got to change that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that I'd say it's one of the pain points. Having been through that as a data manager yourself, where you have reams of listings or an endless volume of QC in the good old days, with the advent of systems like CDB and other analytics tools where you can actually pull all the data into one central place, run all your listings reviews, and one of the huge advantages, or a couple of huge advantages of CDB, is that you can then push queries straight back into the EDC.
Yep.
You can automatically notify vendors if there's data issues that they need to look at as well. And you can also do the bulk querying if you've got discrepant data, the same discrepant data on a number of different subjects.
Yeah, which is transformational if you think about it from that perspective. So, but I'm interested when you say 10 to 12 sources, because the way you presented it sounds like that's standard, which I think is what you were saying. I mean, what diversity of data are you seeing in that 10 to 12?
So, for example, you've got your traditional, your IVRS, your central labs, maybe something like an ECG, as I mentioned before. But we're also seeing wearables, people who are, with heart monitors or even, watches collecting data, or the phones or handheld devices collecting data. We're seeing bedside monitors. We're seeing all these different sorts of things. And what we can see is more and more that's just becoming more commonplace that we're using these. As I think the industry becomes comfortable with the method and mode of data collection, and that the quality of data that we get in is something that we're going to see more, because in theory it gives us quicker access to the data.
I mean, to me, you're describing the early days of a digital trial strategy. I mean, digital data, perhaps more than digital strategy. Do you think that's pretty much now the foundation, the baseline of how we can do trials of the future? It's going to be 10, 12 data sources more. It's going to be more and more digital data.
Yeah, I think it will be. Obviously, it will be dependent on the therapeutic area you're working in and the requirements of the individual trial. But I think that's the way it's going to go to. But having been in this industry for 20 plus years, it wouldn't surprise me if there's going to be another evolution that comes out that streamlines it even further.
So I have kind of two conversations running in my head at the moment. One is this idea of flexible in design, so meeting the scientific needs, the adaptive designs, which historically we know the challenges they present. And then I have this one about flexibility in execution, and I suppose you'd call that decentralized or digital strategy. And I'm trying to reconcile the two. And in my head today, they don't quite fit. You can either be operationally optimized, shall I say, or scientifically optimized. Do you think that's a fair comment, or would you disagree with that?
I think you can do both, but I think what you have to do is you have to be able to work through solutions as you go through. I think you can do both from the adaptive side, and as you adapt, then bring in new solutions. So I think it's possible to have both, but you obviously need clear strategy, clear thinking, just to be able to enable it.
Good. So with that as a backdrop, then, how are Syneos, how are you as you build your team further? Where are you looking to recruit, and how is the role changing? Is it the classic DM that we started with, or is it something brand new?
And so one of the things we've done at Syneos is that we realised that, we need to evolve our data managers. So we've actually created what we call a data scientist group, and we're actually investing in that and providing training to our data managers to evolve them into data scientists and help them to what they need to do to become data scientists, so that they can actually be effective in this new world of clinical trials, and with all the different data types, how to handle them, and how to work effectively with the rest of the clinical team and be that pivotal team member that I spoke about earlier.
Good, that's interesting. And how do you see the data scientist then? So does data managers become data scientists? Do you see any impact on, say, the classic CRA role there, or does that remain untouched?
There will always be a need for CRA. There will always be a need for someone to potentially to go on site. I do think there's potential for some of that role to transition away, like we're seeing with some of the central monitoring. So there's data that can be, source data can be made available, so there's no reason why remote monitoring can't be done. So while I still think there will always be a need for a CRA, I think in some respects some of the responsibilities can potentially be transitioned in the future.
Good. So back to, it's still a good time to be a data manager.
Still a great time to be a data manager.
Perfect. So interesting. So Syneos are investing in, should we say, that next generation of data scientists. Do you see largely that's a focus on retooling the current people, or is that also an investment of new people coming in as well?
Yeah, so predominantly at the moment we're looking at retooling our existing people. We've got a great pool of data managers who we think and have got all the, let's say, skills to be able to come to data scientists. So we're starting off small at the moment, and we're going to, as time goes on, we're going to become more and more large scale with that. However, obviously, as Syneos are recruiting, if we're looking for a data scientist, it would be foolish of us not to, be looking for people with those skills that can bring in and add to that, particularly people that have had experience in that role in other companies can then bring something to Syneos with their experience.
So building on that, about you bringing data science to the fore, reinforcing the role of the data manager, what else makes Syneos data management and your team successful? So what does technology have to do? What do you push back on your customers about? How are you dealing with sites, patients, the whole 9 yards, I guess?
We actually have all the tools we need. One of the things when it's working with sponsors, I think one of the things we need to realign what the expectations are. That sometimes in the past there may be a clinical project manager that was dealing with each of these what we call DCT vendors. But now you're going to find data managers or data scientists coming more to the forefront. So when dealing with a client, it could be that they're dealing with a data manager more because they're actually closer to the data, closer to the different sort of vendors. One of the other obviously complications is it actually comes to getting all the data in, and that's one of the key things. Now, obviously, something that's done when you're setting up a trial, but of course, when it comes to closing out a trial, you're dealing with 10, 12 different vendors in order to get their data in at time, and they probably all have their own different timelines. So it's a stakeholder management in that is going to be really, really key. And our sponsors need to have the expectation that when you're dealing with 10, 12 different stakeholder managers, that's 10 or 12 different opinions, sets of standard timelines that you have to deal with. So it's just the level of management, project management, stakeholder management that's going to need to go into that is elevated from when you're just dealing with one or two sources of data.
And if you've got that many sources, are you seeing database lock timelines move out, or is the pressure that you need to shorten them regardless? Is that where the stakeholder goes to even another level?
Yeah, so what we're actually seeing most recently is there is more and more pressure to shorten them. There's more and more pressure to turn around that last subject, last visit to database lock quicker than ever. I mentioned we've used technology to help us with that, whether it be AI, machine learning, but also having that project management, that stakeholder management, and having that planned up front as you're heading towards closeout to ensure that everyone is working towards the same goals, the same timelines. What we're actually seeing is, I would say, over the last 2 or 3 years, even with all the different data sources, we've still been able to drive down our database lock timelines.
Good. I'm glad to hear it, because I think we've spent a lot of time, and I know your group has experience of driving the build timelines way down. The 4-week build is what we keep talking about, although Drew is now onto a 1-week build idea. But the 4-week build is still kind of where we're trying to get everyone. I think now, as an industry, and Viva for sure, need to focus on the end piece as well. So I think there's a lot of that activity coming. How do you see the role of the data manager then in that database lock, pre-database lock period? Is it heads down, or is it very much coordination?
It's very much coordination. So the data manager, the lead data manager or the lead data scientist will be, the key person in bringing everything together. We wouldn't actually be looking for someone to be heads down cleaning data. Obviously we're trying to automate that as much as possible, but we want this person coordinating, making sure everything's in the right place, rather than focusing on the minutiae. They need to be looking at the big picture. Are we still on track? Is everything coming in on time? We're also seeing our data managers are, I say, doing less data cleaning, more involved in the data analytics and analysis, looking at outliers in data rather than reviewing endless reams of listings that may have happened in days gone by.
We've talked a little bit about Trevor, but maybe we can focus a little bit on digital trials a little bit more. So what's your perspective and the Syneos perspective of the move from, should we say, more classic clinical trials to partially or fully decentralized, fully digital? Is there anything in particular that you see as a big opportunity immediately in front of us, or as an obstacle? Anything you would share on that front?
In terms of technology, the technology is out there. We've now got more and more tools to help us collect the data as we go through digital. And I mentioned before CDB being one of those, which is great because we were able to collate data from multiple sources and clean it all in the one place. So I think we have the technology at our disposal to do it. It's a case of actually piecing it all together, what a good digital clinical trial looks like, and actually thinking, okay, what is the gold standard for what this should look like.
But I think that neatly goes back to what you said about data managers going earlier and earlier in the process, because one of the things, I guess, that keeps me awake at night is this idea of, you being presented a protocol that's final, and then someone says, now decentralize that. That's going to be a living nightmare. Whereas if you've got that data manager in at the very beginning, who's looking at the data sources and working that strategy out, maybe not to every infinite detail, but at least an awareness of, okay, we've done that 10 times before, it works, we're good, that's brand new, we've never done this. That, I think, shifts things. So how does a CRO like Syneos shift that conversation? Because clearly, sometimes you wrote the protocol, sometimes you're doing just the data management. How do you kind of balance those requirements from one study to the next?
Yeah, so one of the things, we like to work pretty closely with our sponsors, and one of the things we like to have the input on the protocol design, purely because of that. To use within Syneos Health, we've obviously got a lot of expertise. We're concurrently running hundreds, if not thousands, of different trials. So what we like to do is bring that experience to the fore for our sponsors, and one of that is helping them design their protocols, because we will have experience with lots of different DCT vendors that we've got partnerships with, lots of different technology solutions as well. And we feel that, if we're involved right at the start, even when the protocol is being designed, we can actually give some thoughtful input into that. And, whether it be, ensuring the data comes right, you choose the right DCT vendor, or whether it be, how the mode of collection for a particular data point within a study.
Yeah, but getting involved early is clearly the key.
Yeah, and for us, one of the things, as you said, it's not optimal for us to just be given, final written protocol and say, hey, go for it. If we've able to have that input, we can then obviously we've bought into that. We put our stamp on it, and then we also have an insight in exactly how we're going to run it, because we've had that input into it.
I would like to just move towards kind of my standard question I'm asking everyone, and that is to put you in a scenario. If we could give you a magic wand, and you could wave that wand, are there two things that you wish you could just stop doing? Are there two things you wish you could start doing, or be able to do that you can't currently do?
A couple of things I wish we could stop doing is programming listings is one, and this is something that I know the industry is making great strides towards, but even now within CDB, there's still an element of programming code needed for some complex listings. So I think for a data manager to be able to go into a system and just be able to create it without having to program anything, that would be perfect. Probably the non-standardization of things. And maybe this is one of the things that I've also looked at Magical Wand in, is to have everything standard, all data formats across each. Now, I know every company is going to have their own particular needs and wants, but we have obviously, with CDASH and SDTM, but actually just creating a more standard format across the industry would definitely help enable efficiency.
So I love those two. If I do a room 101, I think they're both going in. I think one of the things we've thought through, as you know, is this idea that an EDC element can predefine a listing, and there's a certain metadata flexibility and continuity there. But I think as you go further and further, I would like to see us, I don't want to say de-skill, I guess it's to lower the entry level of someone who can create a listing. And whether that's just by clicking and dragging something or doing some very basic coding. But I do think languages like CQL need to mature more and more into almost function-based code base, so you can just call certain things. I think that will happen and is happening, but I totally agree with you. Getting away from that mentality of listings. Also, I guess getting away from the mentality of where I started, of all the paper. Let's find the exception. I don't want to look for an exception. You tell me in the tool which is the exception and let me action it. So I think that I would take even further. I am also desperate to remove paper from every part of a clinical trial, and I'm including Excel in that. So I think that's got to go. I like the idea of stopping this kind of, I'll call it the misuse of standards. And I think it feels like we've been in this conversation of delivering standards since I started, and yet I don't know. I don't feel like we're yet getting there. So I think we need to put more pressure on groups like CDISC to find a way to fight through. I think what gives me hope is I see a lot of sponsors now pulling back from that position of I'm unique or I'm different, and they're realizing actually the value here is in having a common format, not in having my own format. And that will make that journey to SDTM and ADAM and everything else just so much more simple. And yet we resist it as an industry because everyone thinks they're special. So I totally agree on that one. What about things you'd like to start doing?
A system that would be able to capture all these different types of data formats without any integration whatsoever.
So I guess I'd call that a true data lake strategy, where you don't need to define it, it just comes in, it reads it, there's intelligence in there. Okay?
And the other thing in this is another one which you should do away with, but remove any form of manual review. So cleaning is either all done electronically or it's done by AI, machine learning. And that in a sense would also enable efficiency and timelines, but it will drive an increase in quality ultimately as well.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I mean, I think what upsets me when I think about what we can do and where we're going is the thought of someone still doing a paper-based check that's kind of compare A to B. Yeah. That has to go. I do think though, maybe there's one thing I think we need to invest more in, and that's the idea of having an interactive patient profile where someone can manually just take a step back and look, which I know is not the example you're giving, but that's one area I think I still feel like you need someone to look over the patient and actually just do a sanity check. It's not, is the data right or wrong? Is it too perfect? There's something there, but treating the patient as a whole and looking at that whole data, I think, is one area I'd love us to be able to do and to automate that and have it interactive. So whether it's a medic or a data manager, all of that review is coming back together and being cumulatively stored. And then we can learn from that as well, because that might predefine additional edit checks, additional rules we want to do. So I have to say thank you for this. Thank you for the thought and consideration.